The 60s was a decade of great revolutionary change.
We all want to change the world.
The 60s was a decade of great social turmoil in the United States, covering issues ranging from social rights to the Vietnam War. And the 60s was also the rise of consumerism in the United States, and that had a direct impact on the U.S. auto industry. We saw the rise of consumer advocates like Ralph Nader, who penned the book Unsafe at Any Speed.
The problem of safety is basically a problem of product improvement and investment. And investment means an allocation of costs.
The industry was being torn apart by other forces, too. Hand in glove with the rise of consumerism, you saw the first real social regulation, if you will, of the auto industry. It started at the state level. First of all, with the early emissions laws in California in the early 1960s, the first seatbelt law in Wisconsin in '62.
But a safer and cleaner environment was not the only issue of concern to consumers in the 1960s. As the auto industry struggled to meet new state and federal regulations, consumers faced rising car costs. And as car costs continued to rise, customers found it increasingly difficult to trade out of their vehicles. As a Chevrolet dealer in the 1960s, Wolfington was well aware of the negative impact these changes had on both dealers and customers.
As I was selling cars, I saw that the way cars were sold didn't make any sense, because everything people would do was based on price. And factories would build cars and strip down cars at low price to attract customers to buy that car. But when it came to resale time, those stripped down cars weren't worth anything. And actually the better buy for the customer would have been to buy a more expensive car with more equipment, because of its higher resale value, it actually would have cost them less money to drive. I started a program where I start to sell customers on the idea of don't make your decision based on price, make your decision based on price minus resale.
Wolfington developed a trade cycle program to help his friends and customers understand the nuts and bolts of purchasing a car. He recalls the series of incidents that led up to his decision to sell cars a different way.
Jack Fleming was my insurance man. He had 9 children. And he came in the showroom to buy a 9-passenger station wagon.
Hey, Jack.
Hey,
nice to see you.
Good to see you. How have you been?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Good, thanks.
I said, Jack, take the Impala wagon. They said it costs $300 more, but it's worth $800 more trade-in time.
I just need the 4 wheels and the steering column.
The car I want to show you, Jack, is a car that has air conditioning, power windows and locks, cruise control, tilt steer.
And I went on like that, and he said, Eustace, when I go to the bank, the bank says, Jack, what can you afford? And he said, I can afford $300 a month. And they said, well, you can't afford an Impala then. You have to buy the stripped-down Biscayne. And he said, I tell the bank the story you told me about how it's going to hold resale value. And the bank said, well, we don't know anything about that. And then another day a customer walked in. He said, Eustace, I just spent $1,500 on my trade-in.
What'd you do?
2 months ago, I put 2 Sears tires on the front.
Right.
New rear brakes.
Okay.
Belts, hoses.
So he had really wasted $1,500. And I said to myself, here's a man that threw $1,500 down the sewer, added no value to the car, and it's $1,500 he could have spent with me to buy a new car. If I only could have gotten him in here in some kind of a trading cycle before he spent that money. We didn't have enough money to finance things that way. So I realized that if this thing was ever going to go, I had to go out and change the finance industry, the way they finance cars. To get money to finance this, I joined a company out of New York called Kinney. Kinney was part of a company that would finance individual leasing. I just started into financing individual leasing. And they also had a source of cars, which I couldn't get. And I became their dealer in Philadelphia.
But there were many obstacles to overcome before Wolfington could convince financial institutions to provide funding based on his formula for determining the true cost of a car. Then in 1971, while on a trip to Greece with his wife Marcy, Wolfington was presented with another opportunity to develop his idea.
I was on a trip in Greece as a Chevrolet dealer, a trip to Greece, and the marketing manager from General Motors was there. And so I explained the idea to him on the back of a bus, and he got very interested. But also there was another gentleman sitting across from me who was listening to the conversation. His name was Jim Murphy. He was a Chevrolet dealer, but he was also part of a company in North Jersey called Yegan, who did financing of dealerships through banks. So he said to me on the way home from Greece, why don't we sit together and explain your idea to me?
Yagan enthusiastically bought into Wolfington's program, but before banks would buy into Wolfington's concept, he had to prove cars had a guaranteed resale value. He sent a team of researchers to the NADA library to study the resale value of cars from the 1930s to 1970s.
You know, back in 1973, we made a major breakthrough in the car business, and we were actually the first ones to publish a resale guide.
In the early 1970s, Wolfington put his theories to work at his innovative Auto Vest dealership in New York City.
I wanted to open a store where we could merchandise to the public, where I didn't have a factory tell me what to do, and I didn't have a bank tell me what to do, and I didn't have a dealer tell me what to do. I wanted to be able to open this store in a pure way, merchandise this concept to the customer. And of course, our idea all along was to sell the lowest cost of driving. We used to have a sign that said, selling price minus resale is true cost. And what we sold to customers was true cost.
Wolfington's success with AutoVest led him to the forefront of the auto industry at a time when its fate was uncertain.
As we rolled into the 1970s, as Detroit was just beginning to come to grips with the Japanese, it got hit by a major whammy, and that was the oil embargo of 1973.
The whole industry at this time was going downhill. We grew from 20 cars a month and 4 salesmen to 300 some cars a month in less than a year and a half. I was going to franchise this idea, and it started down the road of franchising these things. And I'd also started to talk to manufacturers, and I'd talk to General Motors, and I'd talk to Ford. General Motors told me, yeah, they like the idea, but, you know, we have to think about it. We can't let you know for 6 months, and maybe it'll be a year, et cetera, et cetera. Ford jumped right on it. Ford in the early 1980s, the leadership at Ford had made their mind up they're going to have quality and that they were going to be innovative. But they weren't jumping in with both feet. They were going to jump in with a test. So after about a year and a half of selling Ford and showing it to dealers and talking to other district managers, and I had to go through a whole process, they finally decided to give it a test. And we took a small test with 1 dealer and 1 market. And of course, we all know who that was. That was Bob Taskin.
By the early 80s, Ford Motor Company took notice of Wolfington's groundbreaking ideas, and half a car was born.
The marketing manager at Ford Motor Company called me and said, I'm going to send a guy down to you that's either the greatest BSer in the world or a genius, one or the other. Well, after I listened for 2 or 3 hours, I had made up my mind that he was one or the other, and I tipped a little toward the genius side.
Bob Tasker was one of the highest volume profit dealers at Lincoln Mercury, was also one of the finest in terms of product and marketing. He was a leader. We used him at Lincoln Mercury to determine all kinds of and judge different programs for the management. And we thought Bob Tasker would be the ideal guy to evaluate this half-car plan of Eustace Wolfington's. So we called Bob and said, we're going to send Eustace up to you. He's got an idea that we think is really interesting, but I said, it sounds so good, I think it could be a scam, and that Eustace is probably one of the world's finest con men, because he's really got me convinced, but I can't believe this thing would work the way he said it would, because it just sounds too easy, and it's such a great way to sell cars. So please, when you see Eustace, listen to what he's got to say, and if you don't like it, and if you see through it and it really is a con, throw him right out. Well, needless to say, Bob Tasca sat down with Eustace, was sold on the program, said this is a fantastic way to sell cars. He's put the program in, and he's the biggest proponent, and has got one of the largest volume dealerships in the United States, and it's all using the half-car system.
The Wolfington Tasca story became famous around the world. Dealers were anxious to find out the secret ingredients of Wolfington's winning formula.
We had a good, solid 50-60% renewal ratio at Tasca. Not only was it good and solid, but everyone who renewed and took a new car off the 2-year cycle, their previous car had been a 5-year-old car. So we had actually taken customers that got themselves into 5-year cycles with one car, showed them it was cheaper to drive a new car every 2 years by avoiding tires, brakes, repairs, maintenance, etc., and plus having the joy of a new car. And we were able to prove that we knew what we were doing and this concept worked. We had said to Ford, look, in the very beginning, if we can get 25% of your business in 2-year trading cycles and renew 60%, and then at the end of the 3rd year get it up to 30%, then to 35%, you'll double your market share at the end of 10 years without adding a customer.
Ford had Wolfington test market this idea for 5 years in dealerships around the country. In every market, the half-a-car program proved to be highly successful. The half-a-car program proved to be a vital tool in helping Ford dealers secure their customer base at a time when the Japanese were making huge gains in the American auto market.
Quality was becoming an increasingly important issue in the 1980s. Americans were beginning to experience sticker shock. On the financing side of the business, there were several things happening. Probably the major thing was a growth in the terms of financing, the length of the financing contract, if you will. Throughout the 30s and the 40s, probably the maximum term on a finance contract, on a credit deal for a new car, if you will, was 24 months. At some point in the mid-50s, that jumped to 36 months. And 36 months essentially became the industry standard through, the 60s and into the 1970s. After the first oil shock, as prices began to rise, as Americans began to experience sticker shock, those terms gradually began creeping up. Long-term loans, which provided a short-term Band-Aid to the industry, quickly became a bugaboo because it meant that consumers were hanging on to their vehicles for longer until they paid off the loan. You were in a real bind if something dramatic happened to your car, if you got in a major accident or your car required major repairs halfway through the life of the loan, because typically you owed more on the vehicle than what you could sell it for or what the vehicle was worth.
What we showed Ford back then, and the big selling point of Ford, was we showed them that with long-term financing, what it was doing was ripping customers off. Customers were financing long-term to get a monthly payment to fit their budget because cars had gone up so high. But they didn't want to stay in their cars long-term. But when they tried to trade out of their cars early, they couldn't because they were out of equity. So they had a lot of unhappy customers. They were getting mad at the dealers, getting mad at the factories, and they were getting mad at the cars because they're starting to spend money on things when most new car buyers like to trade more often. So we said to Ford, if a customer only had to buy half the car, then that would bring their payment down as if they go long-term to pay for the whole car. So why don't we start selling the customer half the car?
Short-term financing has done two things for the industry and for consumers. One, it's made a wider variety of cars, especially more expensive, fancier cars, more affordable to a wider range of people. And it's enabled people, once again for the first time in a number of years, to begin to recycle their cars, to trade in their cars in shorter intervals. I can take my car back to the dealership and swap it for a brand new one after just 2 or 3 years now, instead of holding on to it for 4 or 5 years, and my payments aren't changing. The factories now are changing their emphasis on the leasing side of the business as well as the entire retail business. They're encouraging individual consumers to lease. They're offering a wider variety of alternatives to consumers. Consequently, there's a continuing rise in the number of people, individuals, leasing cars to the point where quickly, within the next year or two, possibly by 97, individual leases may outnumber actual retail sales to people.
I come from a car background, a transportation background. And my family started building carriages in 1876. And my father had spent a lot of years in the business. He died very young at age 47. And I guess he was kind of really down. And on his deathbed, and we had 2 or 3 days together before he died, he had said to me, Eustace, get out of the car business. Get in some other business. He said, the hours are too long, and it's a treadmill. I said, Daddy, I won't get out of it, but I promise you I'll change it.
Most people's idea of the automotive pioneer is Henry Ford, the man who changed the mechanics of the business and made cars affordable for the common American. 50 years later, Eustace Wolfington kept his promise to change the auto business, and he became another kind of pioneer. He also created a more affordable way to drive a car.
For Eustace Wolfington, family and business had always been inextricably entwined.
I worked in the body shop, tearing cars down. And I guess I started fooling around the used car lot when I was about 13. And didn't quite know what I was doing, but I got out there and started selling. And I guess people humored me, but I made my first sales. And then about age 16 is when I really became interested in the summers. I started working the auctions. I got some of my own money and went out and bought my own first car, which I got home and my father told me I paid retail for, which kind of burned me up. So I worked like the Dickens and polished that car up and cleaned it up. I took it to the auction, and I got more money than what I paid for it. And I couldn't wait to come home and show my father the check. But that taught me the value of auctions. I realized then that the only way you ever find out the real value of a car is take it to the auction. That no one's smart enough to appraise a car for what its real value is. And I guess I became fascinated with auctions, and the whole used car market fascinated me. And it was probably a little bit about what happened in my thinking in putting this whole program together.
Wolfington got into the car business through his family, and it was through his family that he would eventually see his ideas come to fruition.
I watched each generation start over in our family. From building carriages to building cars and then to selling cars. And I thought, gee, here I'm coming along and I'm going to start over, and then my family's going to have to start over. Why doesn't somebody try and get in something that we can build and the next generation can come in and take to the next level? But when I got in the car business, I'll never forget the first week there. The man from the factory was walking through. Of course, he didn't know who I was, but I ran up and tapped him on the shoulder. And I said, I'm going to be the biggest salesman in the country. And I said, I'm going to start out selling a car a day. And at that time, I guess, if I'd sold a car a day, that would have been half the production of what we sold in the dealership. And I did. I sold a car a day. And I guess my first year or second year, I was selling the second or third year, I got up to 600 and some cars just by myself, which made me probably one of the top salesmen in the country.
As his vision expanded, Wolfington joined forces with Ford Motor Company.
In fact, 1981, we went to Ford Motor Company. I was at a cocktail party down at the seashore in Avalon, New Jersey. Had just come off of a shipwreck. Shipwreck meaning one of the journeys we took to get where we were, the ship had sunk. And my motto in life was I always get on to new ships. So I was at a cocktail party, and I met a guy from Ford. And I said, I have an idea that I was going to talk to General Motors about that I think would work great for Ford Motor Company. And this guy was in the engineer department. He said, well, Eustace, he said, why don't you write it up? And he went on to explain to me how we write things up in Ford, how we write manuals and we do this and we do that before we can present an idea. Well, that's not my style. So I said, the idea I had, you can't write up. Could you get me an appointment? I left that party thinking that's the end of that. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. He said, I got you an appointment with Mr. Joe Cappy. Well, I didn't know Joe Cappy. He then, later on, he was the marketing director of Ford at the time, Ford Lincoln Mercury division. Later became the president of American Motors, and is now handling the international sales for American Motors. Quite a guy. So I get out there to meet this guy, and introduced myself. He said, before we start this meeting, Eustace, I want you to sign a letter. I said, sign a letter for what? Well, sign a letter that if we take any of your ideas, we can use them and you can't sue us. I said, wait a minute, I spent my money to come out to talk to you, and I have to sign a letter that anything I tell you, you can use? I said, I have to think about that. So I walked around the block for about 20 minutes. I said to myself, as hard as this thing is to teach people, I don't have to worry about this guy. So I walked back and I said, give me the letter, I'll sign the letter.
From his tiny carriage house in Philadelphia, staffed with one assistant, he began packaging his program for Ford.
When he left AutoVest, it was very hard for him because it was his love. And we all knew that as a family. And he moved into a small carriage house across the driveway.
It was basically Eustace, Tom Mercolani, Grace, and I guess I was one of the suppliers. I was kind of the outside guy. But Eustace, Tommy, and Grace were basically the backbone. We worked out of the carriage house, which was world headquarters for half a car at that time. We've come a long way, but those humble beginnings were really the seed to make this oak tree what it is today.
Well, it wasn't difficult at all. It was never difficult. You know, when you're excited and into a concept, whether you're working in a foxhole or whether you're working in the penthouse, it doesn't make any difference. You don't even see it. I mean, you don't even know where you're sitting. I mean, you're so into your concept and so into what you're doing. Where you are, if anything, it's easier with less trappings. It's harder with trappings because they get in the way. So it wasn't hard to start in a carriage house. It was great because it was low rent. Couldn't get any lower rent than that.
Dealers' continuing success with Wolfington's plan enabled him to hire a few consultants from the automotive industry, and they began test marketing the program throughout the country.
I'd say the first market was the key to getting it really pumped up and learning how to overcome objections and how to get into managers' heads and dealers' heads and salespeople heads that, give it a try, and it'll work.
Getting the program started in dealerships around the country proved to be a difficult task. Dealers and consumers did not yet understand the benefit of half a car's trade cycle technology.
Although they were great years and fun years, I mean, there were sleepless nights and weeks where our guys stayed out in California and never got home, weeks and months. The test markets were brutal because we lived in the dealerships, and it was just, make it happen, whatever it takes, and Eustace was right there with us.
The task of getting dealers, manufacturers, and customers to embrace the concept still proved challenging through the 1980s. Wolfington realized the need to educate both the buyers and sellers on the benefits of his program.
I never thought it would ever not go, and I never saw a limitation to it. The limitation was how well we, and the frustration is how well we could educate people to let the customer see it. If an educated person presents it to a customer will take it. So how well could we educate? And I hadn't been in the education business. I've had to learn this the hard way. I called it years in the desert because it was so dry, and it seemed so frustrating. It seemed like I was never going to get there, and it just always seemed like I could never find the key to turn people. And yet, the secret of life is momentum, and you got to get momentum going. And whatever you're doing, if you get momentum going, once you get it going, it'll kind of takes care of itself. And it took us a long time to get the momentum going.
Every year, half a car consultants would gather at what they called the family meeting. to revamp manuals and discuss new training techniques in an effort to better educate dealers, customers, and Ford as to why the technology of trading cycles is as important as the technology of product. The half-a-car consultants proved themselves to be star performers in both the meeting rooms and on stage. Wolfington established a management style based on strong family values.
We talk about the big little company. We always want to have that feeling of family, and that's why we have our corps. Our corps are limited to no more than 15 men to a corps, with a corps captain for every 5, to establish the communication back and forth. So everyone feels that they have attention. They're getting the attention they should get.
We're not a tiered organization, as you know. JE always likes to talk about concentric circles, and that we have a core, the core is in the middle, and it just keeps going out, the circles go out. The great thing about that is it downplays ego, it downplays I, upplays we, but it really, really works. Today we talk about the Deming philosophy of teams, and we talk about Chrysler as team platforms. Half a car was never anything but that. We looked at the way we've changed the way people drive cars. We, period, really believe that we're going to see half a car having an influence on the way corporate America does business, period, just by our structure.
I think it's a great gift to have a mission. I think it's a great gift, and I think what brings everybody in this company together is the fact that what we do have is a mission, that we are out affecting change. That is definitely going to help people. We kid about preaching the gospel. You know, it's not a religious gospel. It's not a gospel to the, so I don't want to misuse that word, but it's gospel in the sense that we do have a message, and the message makes sense, and it's built on sound principles. It's materialistic, certainly not as strong as a spiritual message, but if we're all good at this, maybe we can do that in our next time around, become spiritual leaders. But no, I think we do have a mission, and I think, as I said, I think that's a gift. It's a gift to have a mission. I guess because of the 20 years it took us to get to where we are today, and all the disappointments along the line, and I'm very conservative in projecting the future. I just go back to the basic rules that if we're doing the best job today and continuing improving and doing better than anybody else, the future will take care of itself.
For Wolfington, focusing on today means staying abreast of all facets of the automotive industry. Although he could look back complacently with pride on a lifetime of achievement, like most pioneers, Wolfington is not one to rest on his laurels.
It was a vocation to me. Just like a priest becomes, or a minister makes it a vocation, the car business to me was a vocation. And every customer I ever sold, I wanted him to never, ever buy a car from anybody else ever, ever again. And that's where the change started to take place. How can I give my customer a deal that he'll never buy from anybody again? He had a doctor, he had a lawyer. I was going to be his car man for life.
Wolfington sees the next frontier as developing the used car market.
You see, in the used car business for years, the famous saying was, no two used cars are alike. That was kind of true. I mean, because people didn't all take care of their cars equally. And people didn't always trade for the right reasons, etc. But you never knew what was going to be traded. So if you went out to look for a used car and went to a dealership, he could only offer you what he had. He had no idea what he had coming. Now, with these 2-year cycles, you can go to a dealership today and he can sit down with a book and say, Kelly, here's what I have coming in 2 months, what I have coming in 4 months, what I have coming in 6 months. And here's the customer who owned the car, and here's the kind of mileage they drive. And now the dealer can help you get a good used car, and at the same time, help give his new car customer a fair trade-in. So it's really pulling everything together is what it's done.
Ford are unveiling something different.
The success of Wolfington's half-a-car concept has been broadcast in every major media outlet across the country.
We're not talking about a new Ford. We're talking about a new way for you to get one. It's not leasing, it's not buying, and it's not like ordinary HP. It's called options from Ford. For your prospectus, call free on 0800 111 222.
By expanding on Sloan's principles of 1, creating an annual model, 2, producing a car for every income level, 3, developing the used car market, and 4, providing an affordable finance plan, Wolfington has opened up a whole new dimension of the automotive industry.
I think that Eustace, when he first met with us, built this half-a-car idea is the biggest change in process since Sloan at General Motors, maybe one of the most significant events since that time when Sloan put all these companies together to try to upgrade people from Chevrolet to Buick to Cadillac. And this was the second biggest change in process, and perhaps Eustace is right. He's certainly well along the way to making that a true statement.
James Eustace Wolfington is hardly a household name. I doubt that many consumers will remember Wolfington's name as they may know Henry Ford or Louis Chevrolet or Walter Chrysler, but the auto industry will certainly fondly remember and appreciate the man who created the concept of short-term financing and consequently helped save the industry and brought many consumers back into the fold.